Well, I was born in Jaffa, and I was a baby when we had to leave in 1948 as a result of the first Arab-Israeli war. My father was the engineer for the municipality of Jaffa, and my mother was a nurse with the British hospital. We left in 48, came back to Ramallah where my grandparents lived. So at least we had a home to go to. And I have three brothers, so the four of us and my parents came to Ramallah. We grew up in Ramallah mostly until I was about 10 years old. I went to the Friends school, and the family was all in Ramallah. It was the time when people were still very upset about the situation of losing their homes and and all Palestine. And so I was very involved in the Ramallah activities as a child with the Girl Scouts and with the church, the Orthodox Church. And my grandmother was a big influence on me because she was the daughter of a priest. And my father took a job with the United Nations with the Najwa. He was an engineer, as I mentioned. And when I was about 10 years old, we moved to Amman, Jordan. And my family, my parents and my brothers and I, we lived in Amman for 4 years. And it was a very beautiful experience in Amman because a lot of Palestinian families had settled in Amman. So we had a very, very special experience there. I went to English schools over there, the CMS schools, which are called Christian Missionary Schools. Then we went back to Ramallah in 1960 because my grandfather passed away. And my father felt we need to go back where my grandmother and aunts were and to be part of the family again. So they moved my dad back to the Jerusalem headquarters that UNRWA did. And my father remained with the United Nations. He had been educated in the United States at University of Michigan at Ann Arbor as a young man, having been born in Colombia, South America. He was born there first, and so he was multilingual. And so it helped a lot with his career. In 1960, we moved back to Ramallah, and I went back to the Friends school. And for 2 years, I finished my high school education. And the year I graduated, my husband, that became my husband, Fred Bateh, his legal name is Alfred Joseph Bateh. He was from Brooklyn, New York, a Ramallah boy, born and raised in New York. And he came for a visit. And supposedly he was to stay 2 weeks. Ended up attending my high school graduation, waited 6 months, and we ended up getting married that summer. And I came back with him late September, early November to the United States. And I had my 17th birthday in New York. We lived in New York for a couple of years, and he was part of the Ramallah Trading Company, which his father was was a partner in with his brothers, and loved New York, loved the opportunities it had. But eventually we moved south towards Alabama, to Birmingham, Alabama to be specific, because my in-laws had retired there and they had businesses there. So my father-in-law wanted my husband to come down and help with the businesses there. So in the 60s, about 1965, I think it was, that we moved to Alabama. And I went to school there. It gave me a chance to get back and go to the University of Alabama. And we had two beautiful children, Fuad and Dawn Michelle. And my husband worked as a stockbroker there. And I went to the University of Alabama for 10 years, night classes only, because I was raising my family. And I took my first degree in history and art history. Then I was offered a scholarship to finish my master's in history. And then I was asked to teach. And so I taught at the University of Birmingham at Alabama, University of Alabama at Birmingham, taught history in the history department. And I was also asked by Samford University to teach the Arabic language and also the history of the Middle East. So I had both these issues, and it was part-time, not full-time, because I was very involved with many other things. But what was good is it gave me a chance to be educated, which I wanted, and I'm a teacher at heart. I love teaching. We had a very good life in Alabama. I think it's a wonderful place to raise families. My son went to my son went to private schools, and my daughter went to the Homewood schools, the area we were in. And so our life was a very good life in Alabama. We were very blessed. We were part of the Greek Orthodox Church over there, and we were very involved with the church. And for me especially, my parents came from Ramallah in the 70s after the war was there, devastated them. In 67 was a big devastation that they occupied Ramallah and the West Bank. And so my parents eventually came from Ramallah to Houston, Texas, where my brothers and my uncles lived. And that was quite a change, really, for them, and a shock for all of us about Ramallah being occupied. But I lost my mother in a couple of years after that to cancer, and that was a very difficult thing for me because I had left her so early in life, and yet here she was with me, and all of a sudden she had cancer and she had a very short time to live. But God was very gracious to us because He must have answered my prayer that she lived 4 more years, which gave me time with her. But those 4 years were very special. While she was in agony through bone cancer and the treatments of cancer, I had a chance to have her in Birmingham. I brought her to Birmingham, and she stayed with me part-time, and I took care of her. Those very precious years as we look back into it. But it affected me a lot in many ways, and in particular, it affected me because my mother was a wonderful Christian. And after her death, and her influence on me through her faith, after her death, I had a beautiful conversion experience, really. And I had a calling to teach the Word of God. And so that took over my life, really. So I dropped everything that I was involved in, and I started teaching the Word of God, opened my home to the Lord. My husband was very supportive, Fuad. And his Arabic name is Fuad, although his legal name was Alfred. He was very supportive, and so had speaking engagements. I spoke at different churches and communities. I traveled and spoke. My children grew up. They were wonderful children, very good children. My son went to Hampton-Sydney College in Virginia, and then he worked in D.C. At the World Bank, came back to Alabama, studied law at the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa, and eventually got his master's at Georgetown in international law. And he ended up going to the Middle East to help the Palestinian issue. And his specialty was water and environment, and so he spent about 10 years of his time negotiating. He was on the peace talks, trying to settle the issues over there. So he gave a lot of his time for that. Which I admired very much, and I didn't know how much he was involved, but he was. He lives now in Spain, in Barcelona, Spain, married to a French young lady who's a doctor, and they have 2 beautiful children, and they happen to be here at the convention today. They came from Barcelona a few days ago. They have 2 little boys. One is Alfred. He's about six and a half, he says, and the little one is about 4 years old, and his name is Ilyas, after my father. My daughter is married to Eddie Krim, and they have 3 beautiful daughters. My granddaughters are just the love of my life, really. They one Hannah, who is 21, Isabella, who's going to be 20, and Katie, who's in high school. She's 17. So I'm very proud of them. They're all very successful girls and doing very well. Isabella's going into nursing school. Hannah is just sat for the MCAT, hoping to go into medical school. And the little one is a soccer player. She's the athlete in the family. So I'm very proud of my children and grandchildren. Fleur, who's my son's wife, is a very accomplished doctor. She is a gynecologist with a specialty in vitro. So this is basically the history of the family. The sad thing is that I lost my husband 10 years after I lost my mother, also to cancer, prostate cancer. Fred was a wonderful husband for 30 years. We had a very beautiful marriage, very supportive of me and my education, and very proud of the fact that I finished college and went on. He was a very special man, multifaceted, if I may use that, and very supportive. In 1993, he passed away with prostate cancer, so I lost him. But God was always gracious, and the fact that I had faith, it strengthened me to know that, that what's important is a good life, a healthy life, a life of faith, believing. And so my walk right now has been with the Lord, really. I teach about the fact that there is a life after death, and that life continues, and that we should set our hearts on above, things above, rather than the things below, as they say. And so that has been my life, basically. My memories of Ramallah are very vivid. And what amazes me is that although it was 10 years, but evidently the first 10 years of your childhood are very effective, and they impress you a lot. I myself was amazed how much I remembered. For example, all the things we did as children. For example, the feast of the church, which were very much a part of our life. We remember, especially Easter in particular, was a big feast, and the families were all involved, and the preparation along with the family members and the cousins and the neighbors, all related, getting ready for the Easter and so on. Those things stayed with me very vividly. And so every year when I would make the cookies for Easter, ka'ak and ma'moul, I was very homesick. And I would get up and write about Easter in Ramallah, because I longed for those days. And what was amazing is I remembered the hymnology of the church, and I was very young to listen to the choir, but I remembered the hymnology almost word for word as a child, and I didn't realize I had memorized it because I loved it so. And so the celebrating of the Holy Week, Holy Friday night, and the lamentations of the church, and I used to yearn, one day I want to sing exactly like that. And that happened later on, because I helped in Birmingham the Ramallah women to sing those hymns during Holy Friday in Arabic, and it was wonderful to remember. Also, Sabt al-Nur was something very special, the Holy Saturday of the Light, and I was part of the little children when I was young, and dressed in white with veils, holding candles and walking in a procession in Ramallah along with the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts, and the mayor and the people, the councilmen, Baladiyya, members. And the whole town was out from the church, the processions going out towards the Manara, which is the front of the church, to meet the light from Jerusalem, the holy light, Sabt al-Nur, and the dancing in the streets of the young men with the tabli and on each other's shoulders dancing, and they would sing Sabt al-Nur, وعيدنا وزرنا قبر سيدنا وسيدنا عيسى المسيح والمسيح أتانا وبدم اشترانا. I mean, as a child, they stayed with me. And it's amazing the impression on a child that you could remember all these things. But I had a very wise grandmother. I want to tell you, she was the daughter of a priest. And if there was a wise grandmother in all of Ramallah, she was the wisest. My grandmother, for now, we still mention what a great lady she was. My grandmother was married at age 15, and she and my grandfather went to South America and lived in Colombia, and her children were born in South America, in Colombia. My father was the eldest, and so his first language was Spanish. They came back to Ramallah in 1924, and the children didn't speak any Arabic at the time, but my great-grandfather was a priest, and he taught my father the Arabic language so that he'd catch up with the other students. My father went to the Friends Boys School. He was very bright, and eventually, as I mentioned earlier, ended up coming to the United States for his education and finished at Ann Arbor, Michigan. My grandmother, when she went back in 1924, saw the poverty, saw the infant mortality, saw the problems of Ramallah, and so she started the first women's organization to help the women and to help the poor. And so she started a Nahda Women's Organization, which is still running till today. She was the one who founded it. She started it in her home. Actually, one of the rooms in her home became a clinic. She'd bring a doctor to the house once a week from Jerusalem so that the women could bring their children, and he would check their eyes and their problems and deal with it. And so that was her first contribution to Ramallah. And eventually, there's so much I can tell you about Al-Nahda women, because I grew up seeing that with my grandmother, helping the poor people and trying to establish food for the children as they came out of school to have a hot meal. There were other women who joined her who were very educated women for their time, Na'mi Shahla, Mas'adi Daoud, Jamila Hanna. These are women of stature, I call them, because they're strong, solid, educated women who joined her and helped her to help the poor in Ramallah. So Al-Nahda Women's Organization is still running today, and it has many, there are a lot of attributes there, and they still helping the poor. Today in the meeting, if you stood, you could hear about Al-Nahda. They're still supporting it. I think Da'at Khalaf is the president now, is the head of the Al-Nahda. So it's an honor to speak of my grandmother. We're very proud of her accomplishment as a woman who could see the needs and stand for those needs and stand behind the poor and the needy. But that's due to her Christian faith and her father being a priest. And so she instilled, she was a quiet woman but very wise. She instilled a lot in me as to growing up with her, and always gave me advice, taught me the Psalms by heart. The 51st Psalm, Arhamni ya Rabbi hasab adim rahmatak. She taught me the 23rd Psalm. So she had an influence on our lives very much, and how to behave in public and so on. So I owe a lot to my grandmother.
And what was your grandmother's name?
Badi'a Khoury Salami. Badi'a Khoury Salami. And so I should have mentioned her name earlier. But also her sister, Auntie Hilani Khoury, she was her sister who actually ran the Sunday school in Ramallah. And she taught us a lot about the Bible. She ran the choir. She had a natural ability where she could detect the altos, the sopranos, and so on. She had a very, very fine voice, and she taught us in the choir in Ramallah. So I was a member of the Orthodox Church choir with my brothers, and that meant a lot to us because we were very involved in the church as a result. And she also taught us, as I said, the Bible. And she was the head of the Sunday school in Ramallah, and many, many Ramallah women remember her. And so basically these are the things that I can tell you about. We're very proud of the fact that we are from Ramallah, that the Ramallah people have always supported each other. There's another aspect of Ramallah that I loved very much, and I spoke about it at one of the mid-year meetings, and that is the songs of Ramallah. The songs of Ramallah spoke of the activities of the people, and we as children used to hear some noise from a neighborhood, the neighbors nearby singing, the tabli with the drum going and the singing. And we'd recognize from the sound of that song, the words of that there's an engagement going on. Or we'd recognize that somebody just came back from America and the songs indicated the occasion. So what was so beautiful is the songs of Ramallah reflected the moment of why the festivities. And so I thought these were very influential on us, and we here at the convention heard some of the ladies singing some of those songs, which I wish we would never forget. With this new generation, you don't know if they'll remember those, but these songs brought joy to our hearts, these activities. So we used to run as children to find out, you know, where the music is coming from and who was celebrating what and what wedding is coming up and so on. So I think there's a lot to say about our tradition of song and dance. I left Ramallah when I was 16, having finished high school. And coming to New York, I wanted very much to come to the United States. First of all, we've always heard about America, and there was a lot of opportunity. Being in Ramallah, we didn't have the universities that we wanted to go to, but I knew coming to the United States was what I wanted. And my impression was, I loved New York. I loved New York. I liked fashion. I liked being in the big city. My husband having been born and raised there, you know, exposed me to everything wonderful in New York. The museums, the Broadway shows, the shopping in New York. He was a New Yorker at heart, very much a New Yorker, had lived in Manhattan. And so it was a very nice experience. And also I was surprised to see that there was a large Arabic community in Brooklyn. There was a Syrian Lebanese community that was very active, and they had their own clubs, and we belonged to the church, the Orthodox Church, St. Mary's Church in Brooklyn. And so we made new friends, and it was lovely to be part of the church and its activities. But New York was very, I loved New York because it gave me a chance to also go study. I studied there, I went to the YMCA. They had offered classes in French and different languages. And just discovering New York, I was a wide-eyed young woman who just wanted to take it all in. And so it was a very good experience for us. We lived off the Narrows in Brooklyn, right by the water. We're seeing the ships coming in. And, you know, it was just a beautiful place to be. We ended up going to Birmingham, Alabama, because of my in-laws having moved there. And that was about 1965. And so that started a whole new lifestyle, because it was a quieter town, and it was a very good place to raise a family. But what was very unique for me was that I had a chance to continue my education there. And I had no idea that as a mother and I still could go to school. You know, we think once you're married you cannot go, but what was so beautiful is that I met with the registrar at the university, and I thought, you know, they probably won't accept me. You know, we think we have to. So I couldn't get my records from the French school back home because the war had just 67 had taken place. But they asked me if I would take 2 classes as a temporary student, and I did, and I made straight A's because I thought it was much easier than I thought, because having come from the French, we had a very good education. And so I received a letter saying, you are a permanent student now. And so I loved every minute of my education. I'm a student at heart. I love education. I could still go for more classes, and I still do register for classes. And so I took it all in. And I was a very good student. And when I did my master's, if I may brag a little bit, I received the highest award of a graduate school at the university. So I have the plaques to show them. And then I was asked by the university president if I would represent the School of Humanities to start the Alumni Society, because we didn't have a graduate alumni society. So I was one of 20 people that started as a steering committee, you know, to start an alumni society in Birmingham for the University of Alabama. And so we met and we wrote the bylaws, and we started the Alumni Society, which is very successful. I became the first female president, and I'm still very involved with the University of Alabama at Birmingham. And so I was a student for so many years, but I became part of the administration to see how things run. And so we raised money for scholarships, and I'm still very, like I said, involved in helping the students, you know, at the university. And of course, one of my loves is, because I'm an art history major also, is the arts world. And I travel a lot. I go to Europe often, and I've seen a lot of beautiful museums around the world. And my son, since he lives in Spain, I travel to Spain, and on the way, maybe I end up in the Middle East. Maybe I'm saying too much, I don't know. So I love the Holy Land. I've taken tours of people to the Holy Land because of my knowledge of the Bible, thank God. And people like to see the reality, that it is real, what they're studying. And in the South, they are very strong students of the Bible, many women. And so I have large classes of women coming from all denominations to study at home with me. I teach them, and I teach wherever the Lord opens a chance for me. And they like to, and seem to make the Holy Land real for them, because it is real, and I show them where everything is on the map and so on. But I love taking people to the Holy Land to see our background and our family, our home. And so that's been a very big part of my life for the last 40 years, really, since the 80s. When I went back in 1968, which was right after the 1967 war, I wanted to go back see my family, my parents and my grandmother. The people there were still in shock that they have been taken over. In 6 days, Ramallah was under occupation. They were shocked, but the influence yet had not taken place of the occupation as much. In other words, people still felt that they were still the same as before, although occupied. In other words, they were still hoping, is what I found out, that there'd be peace talks now, that the Israelis took over now, they will settle the problem, will open the country all to both Arabs and Israelis. And there were a lot of talks taking place in private homes. And I attended some of them with Israelis, actually. I won't mention names because it might affect some people's lives, but there used to be meetings actually between the military governor of Ramallah with people that were educated men there in Ramallah, lawyers and so on. And they were hoping that they would work things out. That was the early impression I had right after the '67 war. And so there was hope, and also we had a chance, for me, I had a chance to go back to see Jaffa for the first time in my life. But I can tell you this, flying, going home, and I had to go through Kennedy Airport. It was delayed 6 hours, the flight in Kennedy Airport. And I had to land into Tel Aviv for the first time in my life. And Tel Aviv and Jaffa are like twin cities. And so as we finally approached over Jaffa and Tel Aviv, I could see the seashore and the lights. And it was in the middle of the night because we were delayed in Kennedy 6 hours. I can tell you my tears just started pouring. I put my sunglasses on, although it was not I didn't want anyone to see that I was crying, because I thought this is the first time I'm gonna step on the place where I was born. And that really affected me a lot. But when I came down and when we landed, I was the only one from the whole plane that was pulled aside because I was a Palestinian. And they asked me to take everything off, and there were women there and so on. I was very hurt and insulted. My tears flowed because I felt offended. But I saw my parents, my father and my aunt were waiting. They had been waiting, didn't know about the delay, so had been waiting all day from about noon until it was like 1 o'clock at night. And after a long searching me, I finally met with my father after the years I've been away, my aunt, and just sobbed just to see them. And then my dad said, we have a curfew in Ramallah, we cannot go back to Ramallah, the curfew is at 6 o'clock. And so I don't know what we're gonna do. We might have to go to Jerusalem, spend the night in a hotel, and then go to Ramallah. And imagine my mother, my grandmother waiting in Ramallah, not knowing about the flight, that it was late 6 hours, and worrying about what's happened. And so when we got to Jerusalem, my father, they had stolen his car during the war. And so he had to, just a small Peugeot that he had from work, that he could pick me up in that. And we got to Jerusalem, and he said, if we go to Ramallah, we might be caught by a dawriye, which is, and so we'll be taking chances. He said, it was almost 3 by the time we got out of that airport in the morning. And so he said, you know what, I'm gonna just cruise slowly into Ramallah, hoping that we won't go. I remember at the time, if I have to say this, I had jewelry on. And I kept thinking, if they catch us, I'm sure everything. So I started hiding my jewelry inside my clothes. That's the first thing that came to my mind. Anyway, we cruised and ended up, luckily, without any of the Israelis, finding us. And so we finally got to Ramallah about early morning, about maybe 4 in the morning by then. And my mother and my grandmother had been sitting up all night on the balcony watching for my dad to come back. So when I got there, they just were very upset about the fact. But anyway, we sat there, had a cup of coffee. I wanted some Arabic coffee. And I was telling them about what happened. So that was my first experience going back. And I was not appreciative of the Israelis and having been searched so much and the only one off the flight to be taken aside. That was my first impression going back. But I went back 11 years later. And what I found 11 years later shocked me, because the people had been more desperate, become more desperate and depressed. Also, there was a lack of energy that I could sense. I felt like the streets were dirty. The people's doors were rusting. And I felt they're giving up the fight. And I remember talking to people I went to school with. Nader Khouri was one of my classmates. Salim Tamari was one of my classmates. Telling them I would take the brushes and paint those doors and try to live life not as a defeated people. And they said, what do you know? You live in America. I had this kind of, what do you know? You're not going through what we're going through. I said, I know you're going through a difficult time, but I will not be a defeatist. I would stand up and stand firm. I felt very strongly about that. Don't give up just because they're around here. This is our home. So there were these discussions back and forth. That was, like I said, 11 years after the first visit. But what bothered me in the early visit, if I may say, in 1968, was I couldn't wait when I got home the next day to walk down the streets in Ramallah, Main Street, to go to Buza Rukab, get ice cream, go see my school, and I had missed all that. But what bothered me at the time, and I noticed it, now this is 68, was I looked at the signs on the street corners, the street signs. They were already in Hebrew as well as Arabic. And I was stunned, because I realized if they are already in the Hebrew language, these people are not planning to leave. When you invest in something to put signs in the Hebrew language, that means they have no plans to leave. I knew immediately in my heart, that's not a good sign. And that was in 68. And sure enough, they did not, although they were discussing the separation and peace talks and very hopeful in 68, by the time I went back, 11 years later, I saw how depressed and how disappointed the people were. And that was heartbreaking. What makes me sad is the realization that, as my son had told me, who sat on the peace talks, he said, Mom, we agree at the table with one thing after many hours of negotiations, and the very next day they would announce on television they're going to do 200 more settlements. What they say at the table, they will not enforce. And no one can stop them. And so you can do all the peace talks you want, all the negotiations. If you don't have the power to back up what you agree on, and they have the upper hand, there's no way we could stop them. And the Israelis' plan is to take a little at a time, one chunk at a time. We've seen this over the years. It's very frustrating. They have no plans to give back any of the land. They have forced the people from the villages towards Ramallah. We know Ramallah has changed a lot. First of all, a lot of the people, families, and many Christian families have left and have come to the West and Europe and the West. There's a whole new element in Ramallah, a whole new standard. A lot of the villagers that were forced off their land have settled in Ramallah. And it's a whole new ballgame there. The mentality has changed. the openness of the people, the Western-minded people that I grew up with. We were always open, and now today you don't see that. It's very sad. And when we go back to Ramallah, you see the changes, and you know, and sometimes it's for the good, sometimes it's depressing to see that. I felt we have gone backwards in our culture. The mentality of the people has changed, and I think everybody is aware. After the Khomeini regime, this wave of Islamic fundamentalism has come across, and it's affected a lot of the people in the Middle East, including in Ramallah. And so, not that I have anything against, and I have my best friends who are Muslims, and I love them dearly, and wonderful people. It's just that it forces people to feel like they have to be like the rest of everybody. There's the pressure. The society is pressuring the people to be what they might not want to be. But at the same time, you know, having studied history and seen history, I see that history evolves completely all the time. History repeats itself. I don't know where it's all going exactly, but there's no hope, much hope left in the hearts of the Palestinians. Not that to say that there is no hope. There is always hope. We don't know what's coming. I don't think there'll be a two-state solution. I don't think there'll be a one-state solution. As we know, there's more of an apartheid kind of situation there. Not that we're happy about it. I think myself is that for me, as a person who's in America, they have often asked me to speak. I don't want to speak to Palestinians or to preach to the choir, as they say. I want to speak to the Jewish people in America, the people who are decent, that they are not realizing the lack of humanity there, the lack of that the Israelis are really treating the Palestinians in a worse way than any other nation is treated people that are occupied. And it is a long occupation. So I don't know whether we could reach enough Jewish people in America who are fighting for their rights, anti-Semitism and all that, that we need to have legal rights. We have to have our own self-governing system. I'm not sure that I'm very proud of what's happening with the leadership in Palestine, to be very honest. We hear all kinds of things, but it's a very sad situation. And so I don't know where it's heading from here on, but I can tell you that as far as peace is concerned, I don't see it. And I think the people that remain there, I admire them, like Dr. Shawki Harb, that stayed and fought the fight. We can't all be there, but our hearts are there. We can support them financially, support the societies like Al-Nahda and others, organizations that help the poor and the needy. But I don't see any answer. I really don't right now. And I don't know what the outcome is. I really didn't believe in violence, and I don't believe in violence, but I think the only way that Israelis can be stopped is to fight them to just stand up to them and fight. I hate to say this. I would not have said that a few years back. But the fact is that they are militaristic, and they're not going to give up, especially with their new settlers there. And so I think that it's going to take another power to stop them. That's my opinion.